guys, welcome to Quilt Club with Stacey Lee. This is week 1 of a 6-week course learning how to make a quilt. I'm so excited you're here and thank you for joining me. This week we're going to learn how to cut your fabric with a rotary blade. But before we do that, we need to make sure your fabric is prepared properly. So let's get started. One of the questions that keeps coming up is, should you pre-wash your fabric? Personally, I don't, but it is a personal preference. If I was using a black, a navy or a red fabric and it was going to be sitting next to a white, I might pre-wash it. But to be honest, sometimes it's just a gut feeling. Sometimes I'll be like, I'm not sure about this fabric, I'm going to pre-wash it. Other times I'll be like, nah, it'll be fine. It's a personal preference, but once you've been quilting for a while, you'll either join the pre-wash camp or the non-pre-wash camp, and it's kind of a thing. So do what works best for you. However, when it comes to pre-cut fabric, it's never recommended you wash them. That's because when you wash them, the edges will fray and you'll have to cut some of the edge off. And some of the patterns you'll be using in the future will require that you use the whole piece of fabric. So never pre-wash a pre-cut fabric. So I just wanted to show you what will happen if you pre-wash a fabric. Here you can see a fabric that I've pre-washed. This was actually a 9-inch cut that I've bought to make face masks with. And you can see the edges are all really tatty and really frayed. So that will all have to be trimmed. And by the time I've trimmed that off, I reckon I'll lose ½ an inch. If you do want to pre-wash your fabric, I recommend only pre-washing fabric that you've bought off the bolt, and be prepared to trim the edges that have become frayed from the washing. If you're worried about the colours running the first time you wash your quilt, you can always throw in a colour catcher. Colour catchers are designed to catch the dye in the wash, and that's a great solution if that's something you're worried about. So let's move on to irons. What iron should you use? And honestly, I'm going to tell you, a hot one. Doesn't matter what iron you use, so long as it's hot. I recommend buying an iron that fits in your budget. If you can afford an Aliso iron, which is a designer iron for quilting, go for it. But if you can only afford a $20 iron from Target, honestly, that's going to do the job too. Steam or no steam? Personally, I do use steam, but I do know that a lot of people don't like to use steam because they feel it can distort the fabric. Like a lot of things with quilting, you have to work out what you like to do and what works best for you. One tip if you do want to use steam is, instead of adding water to the iron, which some people feel shortens the life of it, is you could use a water bottle and spray water onto your fabric and iron that. I know personally I've had to throw out a couple of irons because the water somehow gets contaminated and it gets like a grime or something in it and it stains my fabric. So that could be one way to avoid that. Just a quick word on starch. A lot of people like to use starch. I've actually never used it. When I started quilting, I was on a very tight budget and it just seemed like an unnecessary cost. I know a lot of people love starch. It can help stabilize your fabric and make it easier to cut and sew. So once again, it's your own personal preference. And maybe if you're having trouble with cutting or sewing, it could be something you could go back and try. And if you are going to use starch, just remember to give your iron a clean before and after. So let's get ironing. We always iron our fabric before we start cutting. It helps it lay nice and flat on your cutting mat. Now you might remember me saying we're pressing and not ironing our fabric, and this is critical when we're ironing cut pieces of fabric and 2 pieces of fabric that have been sewn together. However, we don't want to be here all day ironing yards and yards of fabric when we're just trying to get started. We do want to remember we want to iron our fabric firmly and gently, and not vigorously, because we could still pull it out of place. I've treated myself to this nice new ironing mat. I'm so excited to give it a whirl. Okay, so let's start ironing. I'm going to start with this piece here that I've already washed because it's probably the hardest piece to iron. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our 2 selvages. Selvages are the edges of the fabric, and we're going to pop them together, and then we're going to lift it up and give it a bit of a shake, and we want to bring it nice and flat, and we want this line here to be flat. Sometimes it's all wonky, and to straighten that up, you actually need to wiggle the selvages out of line to get that bottom line straight. The bottom line straight is more important than the selvages together perfectly, but starting with the selvages perfectly is where you need to start to work that out. So that looks pretty good to me. I'm just going to pop that on my mat. I'm going to straighten it out, and I'm going to give it a gentle but firm iron, and I'm kind of half ironing, half pressing. Again, I don't want to be here all day, but I also don't want to pull my fabric out of shape and distort it. If you wanted to, you could iron the other side, and it does look a bit wrinkly, so I might as well. So can you see that I'm being gentle but firm? I'm not ironing it really vigorously. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. Okay, so now I'm going to iron this back quarter. Just going to open it up. Now I just need to make sure I get all the stickers off. We don't want them on there. That looks pretty good to me. And there's always a little bit of cardboard inside to keep it nice and flat. This looks pretty good. Sometimes the creases that are in the fabric from when it's been folded on the board to keep it nice in the shops, sometimes you're actually never going to get those out. And that's okay. So long as you've given it a good iron and done your best, you're actually only going to get them out when you wash the quilt for the first time. So don't worry too much. So again, I'm kind of half pressing, half ironing. I'm being gentle but firm. I don't want to be vigorous and I don't want to pull it out of shape. I'm just opened it up and I'm going to iron the crease out. So if you need to get those creases out, you could spray a little bit of water on and just give that an iron. So I've ironed the whole piece of fabric and that looks really good to me. So now let's get ready to cut.